America's Middle East strategy is in shambles. Let me just say that right off the top there. I don't care what anybody of these official government statements say to the contrary, that we're being tough, we're doing the right things, we're helping defend our national security, we're defending our troops. It's all nonsense. And you're going to see why in this episode here. I'm really grateful that we're going to have some great guests. We got more than one on today we're going to share, but we're going to start off with fan favorite Jason Beardsley. Jason, welcome back to it. Director of Vet Initiatives at Stand Together and former senior advisor in the Trump administration. Always grateful to have you on here. You always have some great insights, and man, we're going to need to delve into this one because we need to take a look at what in the world's going on with our policies here.
Well, Colonel Davis, you never disappoint. You open your show with this shocking, sort of statement that our Middle East strategy is in shambles. But
right?
I would have to, the only pushback I'd give you is that purports that we have a Middle East strategy. So we'll dig into it and see what we can make out of this.
Right. So now just kind of the core issue here that we want to center on is the fact that American troops were killed, as we've been warning. It was likely for months. And it finally did happen about a week and a half or so ago in Syria, where one of these drone strikes finally did get through and killed 3 Americans. And then we had a retaliation, which started about a week later. And we said, this is to deter Iran. This is to deter these Iran-backed groups in Iraq and in Syria, and to show them there's a price to pay for that. And so far, that has been an abject failure. It has not deterred anybody. The Red Sea issues continues going on. The ships continue to be attacked. One of our American warships just a couple of days ago came within a hair's breadth of actually being hit by one of these missiles. Apparently, it was the last line of defense that prevented an impact on one of our ships, which could have completely changed the whole course of what's going on out here. We've also had several of our allied Syrian Democratic Forces, Kurdish folks in Syria, were also killed just a few days ago in what was almost certainly a case of mistaken identity. I'm sure that the Islamic resistance drone that came in again probably wanted to kill more Americans. And if they just hit a different building, they would have. So we're still rolling the dice here. But bottom line is, this is not deterring anybody. Now, I'm going to talk some specific about that in a minute. We're going to bring in another of our favorites, former CIA officer Mike Dimino. He'll be joining us here shortly. But first of all, Jason, I want to look at the elephant in the room, because all this is not in a vacuum. And these people are not attacking Americans for no reason at all. It all stems back to the Israel-Hamas war. And you talk about not having a strategy. I think this is where it starts to be illuminated that we got some real problems, I'm going to say. So I'm going to back up just a little bit here. And I think it was December, the Israeli ambassador to the UK was interviewed in light of President Biden having said a few days before this that it's America's policy that there be a 2-state solution. And she was asked by one of the British interviewers, what is Israel's position? Are they going to do that? Watch this.
Still a chance for a 2-state solution?
I think it's about time for the world to realize the Oslo paradigm failed on the 7th of October, and we need to build a new one.
That new one include the Palestinians living in a state of their own?
I think the biggest question is, what type of Palestinians are on the other side? This is what Israel realized on the 7th of October. The answer is absolutely no. And why are you obsessed with a formula that never worked, that created this radical people in the other side? Why are you obsessed with that?
First of all, it's like, man, that woman is getting after that guy. Why are you obsessed about wanting a state for people so they don't have to live in subjection? But we'll set that aside for the moment. But that didn't completely deter Biden, because he's like, no, I know that you said absolutely not. And Netanyahu, shortly after that, said basically the same thing. But on, I believe it was the 19th of January, so last month, Biden was again asked, is it American policy for a 2-state solution?
Reconsider conditions on Israel aid, given what Netanyahu said about a 1-state?
I think we'll be able to work something out.
What does that mean?
There are a number of types of 2-state solutions. There's a number of countries that are members of the UN that are still don't have their own militaries. A number of states that have limitations on it. And so So I think there's ways in which this could work.
But Bibi has said he's opposed to any of two-state solutions.
Say that.
So what is he open to?
I'll let you know.
Did you talk about it this morning?
Okay. Well, first of all, what he said made no sense because that's not what she asked him. She asked him about a two-state solution, and he's talking about some militaries. I don't even know. It made no sense at all. And then she said, but Netanyahu said no two-state solution. No, that's not what he said. Really? Because I think that it's exactly what he said. Well, fast forward now to just a couple of days ago. And look, this is going to be a hard one to watch. This is Biden again. 2 days ago, he was asked about the process or the possibilities of a ceasefire that Hamas had said, here's our counter proposal to what Israel was saying so that they can get all their hostages back. And he was asked, what do you think about this? Now, before I show this, I'll just warn you, it's going to be painful to watch and you'll see why.
There is some movement, and I don't want to, well, maybe choose my words. There's some movement. There's been a response from there's been a response from the opposition, but yes, I'm sorry, from Hamas, but it seems to be a little over the top. We're not sure where it is. There's a continuing negotiation right now.
Now, Jason, contrast that painful thing to watch of where the president of the United States, the most powerful position on the planet, can't even get a sentence out, can't even remember who he's talking about there, with the leader of Israel, who the next day said this.
We are on our way to that decisive victory. It is in our hands. It's not a matter of perhaps weeks, but it is in a matter of months. The IDF are working systematically, and they will achieve all the objectives of the war. They're going to release all the hostages, eliminate Hamas, and Gaza will no longer be a threat to Israel. I have decided that that is our objective. That is the decision I made at the beginning of this war, and we will not suffice with less.
So this is on the heels, Jason, of I believe it was on the 19th of January, where Netanyahu boldly said, I will tell America no. We'll tell them yes where we must and no where we need to. And now that you see, no matter what Biden says, he says now basically everything is off the table that the U.S. wants. We are going to do what we damn well please. And they're going after all these things. And this is what I really want to talk to you about, first of all, because in my view, what he's saying they're going to do is militarily unattainable. You are not going to destroy Hamas and bring peace to Israel unless you physically drive all of the 7 million Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank and eliminate all those people, which would be a war crime. You're not going to bring peace by trying to destroy Hamas and in the meantime destroying tens of thousands of innocent people and wiping out their ability to live in the Gaza Strip once it's over. So all I think he's doing is building more problems for himself. And as we're going to talk about here in a minute with Mike Dimino, that's causing problems for America.
Yeah, Colonel Davies, you set up a really profound set of sound bites there that really compete in reality. The reality, as you just suggested, is that when I like the words he chose in that statement is, I decided this, I decided that. And the I is something like what you just proposed, which is I've decided to destroy Hamas completely, or settle this situation, ensure there's no threat, and so on and so forth, which is a profoundly idealistic utopian statement in a real world where the enemy gets a vote, right? The opposition gets a vote. The other people on the other side of this get a vote. And so, as we've seen for years, there is no end to the struggle of violence in these areas where there are long-term, thousands of years, factionalizations where peoples are motivated by political undercurrents, economic undercurrents, situational, cultural undercurrents that all presuppose that if you're talking about solving these problems, just as you just outlined, the only solutions we've seen in modern warfare, we're talking World War II style leveling of cities, and so we're not talking about that here. And so it's a little bit ironic that both of these statesmen stand up and determine for others what is bound to be, when you and I as warriors know on the ground, counterinsurgency, guerrilla warfare, these ideas that are, talked about rhetorically in the academic space, in the real world do not work. Because in the real world, we talked about this before, you're talking about extinguishing ideas, ideology, philosophy, right? When in the reality is you're using military tools that are tactical, material, objective sort of things that can achieve objective means. But unless you tell the army, the soldier, the man or girl with the rifle, what those objective means are, then you're really trying to say something different, which is an old world concept. We used to call it crusading or colonization or imperialism. Now it's sort of gotten this nice sort of, let's call it a makeover in the modern world. It's sort of, world building, nation building, neocon hawk type stuff. And we know that just doesn't meet with reality. I paid the price for that. You did. Our peers did. We buried friends in Arlington. The idea that you can go in and solve somebody else's problem with violence has long been tested. And in the last part of the 21st century or 20th century and this century, it's not working.
And Jason, I mean, you don't have to look very far back into history. Like 3 years ago now, almost 3 years ago, Afghanistan, after all of that disaster, and every time we can try to increase the amount of troops there and increase the firepower and kill more Taliban, what happened? The Taliban grew. They didn't go down. We didn't diminish the threat. The hatred that they had for us and for the government that was against them, the Afghan government, only grew. And then we had the big surge and all the way up to 140,000 U.S. and NATO troops. And the Taliban also grew. Even though we killed tens of thousands of them, there was never a shortage of somebody to replace them. And of course, we end up being humiliated and leave the country in disgrace. And the Taliban is in charge to this day. The idea that Israel can do what we didn't do, what no one else has succeeded in doing, and kill their way to peace is just absurd on the face of it.
There's an old statement that the reformers gave us during the Reformation, which is the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. And what they meant to say with that is the more you kill martyrs for this cause, the more you're going to see a growth at the, let's call it the heart level. And we've been watching that. That's what you're saying. The Houthi rebels in Yemen, who were out of power and meaningless, took over in 2014, and ever since have been harassing and interdicting Western countries. Saudi Arabia bombed them for 10 years. It didn't bomb out the ideology. So here we are today talking about the same thing. And what we would recommend, I think what I would recommend, is people that are, want to see, well, what are the solutions here? They have to be applied much more, let's call it nuance. A tool like the military cannot exist in isolation. So like building a house, you can't just use a hammer. You need drivers, you need saws, you need all these capabilities. That's what the economic warfare is about. That's what cyber war is about. That's what diplomacy and all those things have to be coherent. They have to be tied
how about this tool we don't ever pull out? It's got dust all over it. Wisdom. Okay, you don't get everything that you want, but if you look at reality and you apply wisdom, then all these other tools that you mentioned, all of them, to include the military, maybe they can build something. But all we do is keep the damn hammer out there and leave the rest of them in the kit. What do we think?
There's an old story of a man, looking around, Athens with a lantern and trying to find, the man of wisdom. And classically, he's searching forever. If you're looking for wisdom in DC, keep looking and don't hold your breath.
Well said. That's wisdom. So that's kind of where we are. That's the bottom line right now. Is you see that the White House has no influence over Israel. We give plane loads upon plane loads of military kit, gear, ammunition by the day. I think there's still multiple American transport planes landing every day in Israel, bringing this stuff in there with no strings attached. And we're now trying to get more money again with no strings attached, and they can do whatever they want. And now Netanyahu recognizes it and said, yeah, and I'm going to continue to do that. Here's the problem. There is a cost to the United States. This is not neutral. There is a negative reaction to this. And, we've been trying to, as I said at the outset here, we've been trying to kill our way to peace and to deterrence by taking out all these people that killed the American troops there, that, by the way, shouldn't be there. They shouldn't have been there before. They should leave now instead of being a point of vulnerability. We'll talk about that later too. But the latest salvo we had was yesterday, where we had an assassination of an Iraqi troop, an Iraqi leader who was actually as part of the Iraqi security forces, which sounds strange because, wait a minute, we're talking about the Iran-backed group that killed the Americans. Yes, we are. And as Mike's going to show us here in a minute, those are one and the same. But let me show you a little bit about the reaction of our so-called ally, Iraq, when we took this out. What we're going to show you here is there was a BBC crew that was on site last night that was trying to cover this and ran into some problems.
Now, there have been calls tonight from Shia paramilitary leaders, pro-Iranian militia leaders, for their supporters to come out on the streets to show their anger. There have been calls also for retaliation, specifically one militia leader saying, "We want blood for blood."
That doesn't sound like anybody's being deterred right there. And we are now joined by Mike Dimino, former CIA officer, and great guy. I'm so grateful to have you back here and talk about this. And I know this is something you track really closely. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about the person that was taken out there. What is his role, and what is the complication for U.S. policy here?
Yeah, sure, Danny. So it's good to be back with you. Look, this gentleman, Abu Bakr al-Sadi, is a Kataib Hezbollah senior leader. He's not at the very top of the food chain, but he's somebody that you could characterize as a senior leader. He is mostly responsible, or was mostly responsible, for a lot of the group's intelligence activities, a lot of their drone activities. This was his PMF identification card that was actually recovered from the site of the airstrike yesterday. And what's so funny about this is you'll hear a lot of this debate, and we've talked about it on your show before, Danny. Well, how much are these militia groups linked in to the Iraqi government? The PMF, I'll remind people, is this umbrella group of different Shia militias that were instrumental in the counter-ISIS fight that then, because of that, sort of won integration into the Iraqi security forces and the Iraqi government. And so this guy, while being a Kataib Hezbollah senior commander, is also a senior advisor and officer at the PMF. So again, the issue here is that, as we continue to target these groups, it becomes harder and harder to separate them from the Iraqi government. And there are a lot of implications for the United States on that. One of them is, as we continue these negotiations, this higher military commission, as it's called, between the United States and the Iraqis on what the future of the U.S. presence is going to look like in Iraq, there's going to be more and more tension as a result of this kind of thing. And, again, there have been some claims in the media. I think the Biden administration has tried to present this guy as a more senior figure than he really is. I think to try to show that there's some kind of coherent strategy here, that we're making progress here, to kind of the conversation that you and Jason were having earlier. But that's not really the case. So this guy's not really somebody like Abu Fadak, for example, who's the chief of staff of the PMF and also a Hezbollah member, who would be, what you'd really consider a senior leader. So again, I don't think that this guy is that significant. At the same time, though, it does do just enough to increase tension between the Iraqi government and the United States. Again, there's his, driver's license and Iraqi government ID and everything like that.
Now, Mike, let me ask you. So, in terms of what the Iraqi government is doing, because I think it's a surprise to many Americans that actually the Iraqi government is mad about this. I think I saw a couple of pictures on our strike 4 or 5 days ago where the prime minister of Iraq went and actually visited the victims of the people that we wounded in the strike that had allegedly been involved in killing Americans. So there's this real big discontinuity. But I think you told me one of their senior leaders in the aftermath of this strike actually says, "Hey, we need to get rid of the Americans. You guys need to get out of here."
Yeah, so the Iraqi government put out a statement. And again, this is from the official, Iraqi government, Ministry of Interior. I don't know if we have the tweet or anything that we could show on the screen. But look, they came out and said straight up, this trajectory compels the Iraqi government more than ever to terminate the mission of the coalition, right? Speaking about the U.S. coalition. And they've put out statements like this after the Soleimani strike, and they've put them out after U.S. strikes last week. So it's, I don't want to do it here. Like, the Iraqis have basically, asserted this same argument on, their sovereignty is being violated by the United States, and they are not notified in advance of these strikes that are actually killing Iraqi government employees technically. And so, of course, they're very upset about it. And you had Akram al-Kabi, who's the head of the Al-Nujaba Front, another militia group. He came out and made a statement saying that they're going to do everything they can to push the United States out of Iraq. So a lot of this tension with these groups is only growing. It's only increasing. And I don't think the administration has much of a strategy for how to respond to it. The other thing I'll mention, the gentleman I mentioned earlier, Abu Fadak, who's the chief of staff of the PMF, he attended Abu Bakr al-Sadi's funeral procession in Baghdad this morning. So again, the idea that there is any kind of daylight between the Iraqi government at this point and these groups is just not based in reality. And I think we have to be recognizing that on the U.S. side if we want to conduct ourselves the right way and make a good strategy. And I'd argue here that the Iraqi government is not salvageable at this point. It has been more or less turned into a vassal of Iran. And frankly, I know people may not like hearing this. We have nobody but to blame but ourselves in that process. We came in 2003 when Iraq was the most significant regional counterweight to Iran. For as terrible as Saddam was, we overthrew him. There was a vacuum, right, of power that ultimately was filled by ISIS. We had to come back to defeat ISIS. And oh, by the way, the guys who did a lot of that door kicking and door-to-door fighting in a lot of these urban areas happened to be a lot of these Shia militia groups, especially in Iraq. So again, the whole process here really does come back to what you and Jason were talking about, where when we don't have a strategy, we can actually empower our adversaries by using military force rather than actually deny them their objectives.
And in fact, Jason, let me bring you back in here. Why are we there now? If this government is so strongly aligned with Iran and they're so angry at us for doing this, why are we actually in Iraq today?
It's a great question. And by the way, Mike laid out a phenomenally well articulated case. The big picture there is we're paying the Iraqi government. The Iraqi government includes militia that are backed by Iran that hate the U.S. and attack our soldiers. So we're feeding the same element that's actually attacking us. That's why they're attending the funerals of these targeted strikes that we've killed their leadership in, because they're actually part of the Iraqi government. So why are we there was the question. This is, and let me give the party line so that people understand what the Department of Defense has said, what the United States at large has said. We're suggesting that there's I call it a by, with, and through type mission. I'm a special forces guy. And by, with, and through means we use allies and partnerships to strengthen the local paramilitary forces and government forces. So on their own, they can stand up and defeat extremist type of violence. So this is what Mike was talking about. When we left this situation, we used a lot of these paramilitary forces that are now rolled into this PMF, this Popular Mobilization Front. And some of them were Shia, backed by Iran. We used them to help extinguish kind of the ISIS groups. And now those groups have got ingratiated with the Iraqi government. So we're there technically because we're enforcing this idea that if we strengthen their military forces, including these this is like the creature cantina in Star Wars, right? You're dealing with vipers and snakes all over the place. But if we enforce some sort of cogent theory and make them better at their own military defense, they can stand up on their own, and the United States then can settle back. But let's frame this in context to make sure we understand that's the party line. That's what DOD says. It says strengthening the Iraqi government's ability to defend itself. But as Mike pointed out, the Iraqi government is penetrated as a vassal state for Iran, which is precisely what, as he said before, was a counterbalance with the Sunnis, is no longer a counterbalance. In addition to that, the United States pulled out on purpose from this region, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, where we just got killed by drone strikes, pulled out Patriot missile defense systems in 2020, 2019, 2021, because we felt there was no longer a significant threat for air defense systems like that would capably knock out drones or missiles and things like that. We moved them as a flex to go towards Indochina, the Pacific region. And now we left our troops in isolated pockets, assuming that the partnership on the ground was how we would defend ourselves. The problem is we've got a bad partner here. And Mike can tell you all about it. We've probably both been on the ground in the same region. And the trust level that the administration, and this is not only the Biden administration, this goes back some time, the trust level that our senior national security establishment has in these fractured, factionalized, balkanized militia groups is why we're in these positions waiting for the next shoe to drop. We have left ourselves undefended. We've left ourselves vulnerable. And for my money, military strategy says we should be in positions of advantage when we attack. We're not now. So I would suggest that we need
Mike, let me jump back over to you. What are our 2,500 troops in Iraq doing? So I hear the party line that Jason just laid out very clearly. But what's the real line? What's actually going on the ground? I mean, physically, on a day-to-day basis, what are those 2,500 troops in Iraq doing?
Sure, and Jason, I think gave a really good overview there of kind of what the DoD perspective is and what the U.S. government perspective is, and I think that's important for people to hear because the reality, at least in my assessment, is so different from that again there is this weird cognitive dissonance going on. You know, the Biden administration in October. After October 7th, you know, accounting for everything that happened in Israel, republished an executive order on the U.S. presence in Syria, and they gave two official reasons for that: the enduring defeat of ISIS, whatever you want to call it, and trying to make sure Turkey doesn't continue to conduct incursions into northeast Syria beyond kind of the limit line they're at right now. So they provide these official reasons. I'd argue in Syria, those reasons aren't accurate either, but that's kind of a separate talk. We're going to focus on Iraq right now. In Iraq, look, the real reasons we're there, I think, are mainly to try to counter the Iranian influence that is already so prevalent there, kind of as this last ditch effort to say, well, if we pull out, somehow, that process is complete. But the reality is, and again, people, like Jason or me or other people that have spent time in the region know this process is over. It's been completed. It's a matter of acknowledging, whether we like it or not, that is the reality on the ground right now. And so, they're staying there to try to keep the lid on ISIS and to try to, counter Iran. But again, if you look at the ISIS question, the territorial caliphate was destroyed in March of 2019. ISIS has not held any territory in Iraq or Syria since that time. The DoD's own inspector general reports, the language that they're using in those assessments now is that ISIS is in survival mode. And anytime you see a random ISIS attack in Iraq or Syria, there are people out there in DC that will try to, stomp on the table and go, hey, this is evidence that ISIS is resurging or coming back, whatever. And that's all very cynical. And the reality of that is that ISIS is a total husk of its former self, and we don't need to spend.
And that doesn't threaten us in our country. That may have some issues with the people that they can reach over there, i.e., our troops that are out in the middle. But let me get back to that question, Mike. What do our troops do now? What are they doing on the ground?
Well, over the past 4 months, if you want to be very specific on the tactical level, they've been under max force protection measures for months. So they're really not doing much of anything. I mean, right. And as you guys know, when you're under that kind of status, FP Delta or whatever you call it, you're not really able to do much of anything, actually. And if you look at, again, some of these inspector general reports on the actual number of patrols that are being conducted or partner force interactions that are happening to train the Kurds or other people, those interactions are way down because of how dangerous the environment is right now. So the real answer on the more tactical end as opposed to the strategic end is that they're not really doing anything. They're mostly locked down on these facilities.
Yeah, and to give kind of the specific business, Mike's exactly right. These day-to-day operations, the soldiers on the ground, probably predominantly special operations with some intelligence capacity, are going to meet with partner forces. So think of the militia that Mike outlined, the PMF, the Popular Mobilization Front, 40 different types of factional groups there that make up the security force for Iraq. And imagine having pockets of U.S. soldiers training with 5, 10, 15, 20 of those different groups, advising their leadership on military tactics, how to police, how to cordon, how to do search, how to do all these types of like basic soldiering stuff, while also informing things like tactical techniques and procedures, how to use technology. So drone technology, how to enforce or complement your battlefield tactics. So just imagine some of those things that we're teaching leak back into the Iranian-backed Shia militia and become tactics that are used against our own forces. So that day-to-day mission, we've seen it all over. Seen it in Africa, North Africa, Horn of Africa, Central America. We do this all the time. The difference is the partnership forces, we rely on force protection from a stable sort of governing region. In other words, it can be a little bit sloppy. You look at Somalia or something, but the local forces that are hosting us are generally on board with us. They're not also attacking us. That's not the case here in Iraq.
And I want to jump in on that to Jason's point. The amount of pro-U.S. Factions in Iraq are rapidly dwindling. When there are attacks on U.S. forces, historically, it is Iraqi CTS, the counterterrorism service, that helps respond to attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq and provide, some kind of local security partnership. It's not as much, any of the PMF or the Shia militias. It's Iraqi CTS. And guess what? The pro-U.S. head of the Iraqi CTS about 2 months ago was replaced for a pro-PMF, pro-Iran hardliner in that seat by the Iraqi government, which is obviously, as we've already talked about, very dominated by Iran. So they're doing small things to, again, take away any of the last few good partners that we do have on the ground in Iraq. And that only makes it harder for our troops to be safe and to operate there.
Okay, so now I want to kind of pull back out a little bit. So the whole theme of this show here is that our Middle East strikes are failing, and now what? So we started off looking at the elephant in the room, the Israeli-Hamas war, and how there is no strategy. We are basically doing whatever Benjamin Netanyahu says, and we don't appear to have any agency in what we're doing there. That has bleed over effects because now people are taking it out on us in the region because maybe they don't even have the capacity to hit Israel, but they do have the access to hit us at these places in Iraq and Syria. Now, these strikes that we've been trying to do, and the one in Baghdad last night, are obviously not only not going to deter anybody, it just creates more enemies. As we saw from that BBC report a minute ago, that now then the people there are even more angry. And so now then our troops are probably going to be at increasing risk of green on blue attacks, where maybe some of the people we're working with, we're going to have to protect ourselves even from those we're allegedly training, but more on that in a second. Here's my real issue now then. I think the next thing is what comes next. And lots of people are saying, okay, we tried it this way. We tried to hit these Kataib Hezbollah, but that didn't work. Now we need to take it to the head of the snake. We need to go into Iran, like Brother Lindsey Graham argued.
Biden has yet to hit Iran directly. The Iranians could care less how many Houthis you kill. They could care less how many Iraqi militia you killed. The only way they will change their behavior and stop killing Americans and attacking our troops and trying to bomb ships in the Red Sea is for Joe Biden to hit their oil infrastructure and start killing their soldiers inside of Iran.
Now, that will definitely solve this problem. All we got to do is go into Iran, kill a bunch of their guys, and just tell them we don't want a war, so you can't do anything, and then just, kind of batten down the hatches, problem solved, peace on our time. I mean, is there any more dystopian kind of nonsense than that? First, Jason, to you.
Yeah, obviously you go to a neocon to get a war answer. That's the only answer they've got. But again, let's zoom way back out, because Iran has been prolific in malign influence in the region for 50 years, 40 years. The Beirut bombing, the embassy bombing in '83, before the actual barracks bombing, the Khobar towers, the USS Cole, and then you get to assassination attempts here in America. They have a malign influence that stretches around the globe, and it uses special operations and proxies. And the reason the proxies are valuable to this conversation, just where Mike opened up, is because it distances the Tehran leadership from the actual events that happened. They can say, it wasn't us, we don't have control. You'll hear that all the time. You'll hear them say that Tehran doesn't quite control the Houthis. Tehran doesn't control the PMF forces. And, in some academic way or some legal way, they can say that justifiably, but it allows them to continually strike, harass, and interdict our logistics lines, our lines of operations, our LOCs all over the place without ever having to pay the price. Because if we do go head to head with a state like Iran, then you're talking about a full-scale war, which I hope Lindsay's not recommending. The United States has other tools. I'll keep going back to that. We have diplomacy, we have economic, we have cyber, we have other means to put pressure on them, to include regional partners and allied forces, not to mention their big backers, the states like Russia and China. So the real goal here is to get in line, whole of government approach. If you're taking one tool, the U.S. military, to smack down the enemy in a case like this, it is not sufficient to deter them. Your sufficiency comes when you add the jackhammer approach of economics, cyber, diplomacy, regional allies, even our frenemies like China and Russia. That's where we win.
Yeah, and so without a doubt, Lindsey Graham doesn't want a war. He wants it. He wants his cake and eat it too. He wants the freedom to go and bomb and kill anybody in Iran that he wants to, so that they react the way he desires to do so. But Mike, what if he gets his way? What if Biden gives into that pressure, both from him, Jack Keane, David Petraeus, several others who've been saying the same thing, and actually we strike into Iran? Are we going to get Iran that backs down, or are they going to do something different?
Yeah, look, I hope we don't get to that point. If we do, and Danny, I've been on your show and we've talked about Iran's capabilities, and Jason just alluded to some of them as well. They don't have a very strong conventional military. They last conducted, large maneuver warfare back in the 80s. Their Air Force is using, a lot of still third and fourth gen aircraft. They don't have much of a defense industrial base. There's even been some reports that they've been purchasing defense materiel on Amazon and stuff like that. So again, let's just be clear. Iran does not have the conventional capabilities to go toe-to-toe with the United States. But to Jason's point, they have these proxies. They have very broad networks all over the world, and they have very good asymmetric capabilities in other areas, like in missiles. We've talked about their short and medium range ballistic missile capabilities, which they've used famously on U.S. troops at Al-Asad Air Base after the Soleimani stuff, and again in Erbil, and again on Pakistan actually a couple weeks back too. So Iran does have, you can see some of the missile capes there. Look, they've got robust ways that they could make headaches for the United States, and that's the one thing I would say. The people that argue we can go ahead and strike Iran and then everything's over and that's the end of the movie, just don't understand how any of this stuff works. And Iran is going to hit back hard if we strike inside Iran. It doesn't mean that they would, beat the United States in a war or something like that. But the question is about costs, right? If they shut down the Strait of Hormuz, if they conduct attacks all over the world on U.S. interests and things like that, I mean, that is not something that I believe is in U.S. interest. And to Jason's point, policymakers have economic tools, they have diplomatic tools, they have covert action and intelligence capabilities. There are plenty of things we can be doing that do not have to involve a direct conflict. But the other thing I'd argue, Danny, is that really, if we really zoom out even further from kind of where we're at, U.S. interests in the Middle East are very minimal to non-existent, I would argue, right? As America gets closer to being a net oil exporter and things like that, we're not as reliant on the energy resources as we've been in the past. A lot of the counterterrorism threats that emanate from the region have been pretty much tamped down. We've also had a lot of improvement in technology over the past few decades to allow what we call in the intel world over-the-horizon capabilities, where we don't need a physical presence in Iraq and Syria or these other places to keep an eye on terrorist groups and things like that. So I'd actually argue that, again, I think to Jason's point earlier, we have priorities in the Indo-Pacific, we have priorities in Europe and elsewhere that are just so much more important than wasting any more time
Absolutely.
on the Middle East.
Ammunition or personnel. We're going to have to wrap this up in just a second here. I'm going to have to bolt. Actually got another TV hit to do. But Jason, I'll leave the last word to you. one of the things that I think we mentioned at the outset of this is that America doesn't seem to have a strategy how to deal with any of this. It's like just kind of taking tactical actions in different places here. What do you suppose, or what do you propose that the U.S. should do? You've mentioned a lot of the tools that are in the kit. What could we do right now to get this thing from boiling over, to lower the temperature, keep any more Americans from getting killed, and at least get things stable? What would you recommend?
Well, we have a lot of fantastic cards to play. Number one is we are funding the Iraqi government. So if all that money is leaking to the people that are attacking us, well, that's a threat. That's why the Islamic resistance in Iraq came out and said, or the Iranian Islamic resistance in Iraq said, we're going to tamp it down so we don't embarrass the government of Iraq. So that's the threat. First of all, take the money away. Secondly, put your troops in a position, put your military in a strategically advantageous position. Leaving troops in harm's way while you're in a simmering hot war, or warm war, whatever you want to call this, is not the best way to leverage your advantage. We have an advantage from naval power, projection of air, over the horizon, as Mike talked about, all kinds of different capabilities that we can use. So along with the money, we ought to, number one, put the emphasis on protecting our soldiers. And Mike makes a great point about, do we really have to be there in person strategically because of our actual interest in the United States, which is global in nature? And can we afford to pull back a little so that when we start to then sit at the table with Iran, we can actually lay down the diplomatic hammer, which is, look, we're going to pull back your money. Our troops are no longer in harm's way. Now let's talk. Let's begin to talk there. And we can't be wrapped up in other people's problems. So the first thing is just resetting the table. We've got to reset the conditions.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I would love the next step to be the withdrawal of all American troops from Iraq and Syria to get them out of harm's way. And that's what we would do. And if we ever get any guys like you in the government where we actually set strategy, we could probably avoid like 80% of all of these troubles, even with other people doing what they're doing. But we'll have to leave it there for now. And very grateful to both of you guys for coming on today. Really enjoyed it. We'll have to get this group back together again and see what other problems we can solve. And we'll also ask you to watch later tonight, because everybody in the world practically is going to be watching the Tucker Carlson interview Vladimir Putin. That's, the burning news everywhere. We're going to be watching that as well. And Gary and I are actually going to have a sort of a rapid reaction after it's over. You're going to want to tune in and watch that tonight. So once Tucker's finished, tune back in here and you can get the real scoop of what does all this mean, and what was underneath what maybe Tucker asked, or what did when Putin said a certain thing, what did he really mean? We'll have some interesting insights for you tonight. You're not going to want to miss that. Thanks for being here today. Like and subscribe. We remain unintimidated and uncompromised in bringing you the information you need to make sense of your world. And we'll see you later tonight on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.